Welcome back to another sci-fi episode where psychology and finances collide. Today we're going to be talking about digital assets and how you can look at your world of estate planning through the lens of digital assets. And what does that mean? We have attorney Emily Baggett with us today who will be talking about that with us. And just to kind of tease you a little bit, we talk a little bit about what digital assets are, but I just kind of want to quiz you for a moment. Think about it. What do you think those include? And I will say, I'll tell on a group of folks that I did poll in a live class not too long ago. When I asked them to identify just from their brain what they viewed as digital assets, a lot of them were tying it to assets that are already tied to a beneficiary designation or to a payable upon death or a transferable upon death. So those aren't the digital assets that we're necessarily talking about here. Maybe some of them, but mostly the digital assets that you don't think about on the day-to-day, such as crypto, monetary accounts, points accounts, online accounts, creative content, social media, shopping, subscriptions, memberships, and even think about your Android phone and your Apple phone, whichever you subscribe to, and actually where would that go? So Emily, it's so great to have you today. I know that you have a disclaimer that you need to read before we even begin, and that is so legalistic, and I love it.
That is, the required disclaimer states that the views presented today and anything I say are my views and not necessarily represent the views of the DoD or any of its components. And if I do talk about certain products or services during the podcast, I'm using them only as an example, and the DoD does not approve, endorse, or authorize any company, its products, or services today that we talk about. So I always just have to say that before I get started with anything. And
well, thank you, Emily. And I will say that Emily did provide a podcast episode earlier. If you want to scroll down and find an episode just specifically on traditional estate planning. This is not Emily's first rodeo on the Sci-Fi podcast. So really, I should say welcome back.
Well, thank you, Olivia. I'm glad to be back, and I'm excited to be here today to talk about something that has become very, very important to me in the estate planning world as an attorney. As we move into more, this is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, I think, for everyone, and something that we all need to be aware of is digital assets and what that means and how you can protect yourself and your family.
And I got to give the audience a visual. So during the financial symposium, you provided a class called Digital Assets, Your Role in a Changing Environment. And you could hear a pin drop as you were speaking. Everybody was fully focused on you. They had their phones out. They were taking their own pictures. They were ready to learn. They were hungry for this information. The questions that you posed, the hands that were raised, it was amazing. So I want to know specifically what even got you involved in providing this kind of training.
Well, to be honest, when I first read our will, when I got to Redstone, there was a clause in the will that I had been out of estate planning and for a little bit, and there was a clause that I had not seen. And I said, what in the world is this clause? So I started looking at it, researching it, and then we were asked, to the other attorney in the office and I were asked to do a professional development for Fort Rucker. And I said, well, why don't we talk about this digital assets clause? Does anyone ever talk about it, what it means, how you actually do it? And he said, no, I don't really think so. And I started looking at it from a more of a practical standpoint of what does this mean for someone when you're actually doing it? I mean, we see the clause in the will, but does anyone ever explain this clause to anyone when they come in? I mean, we check the box and say digital assets, yes. But does anyone explain it to the client when they come in and really say, this is what you need to do, step 1, 2, 3? And that's where this kind of all came about and where I got started when I first got here to Redstone And it's become kind of my pet project since then, and making sure that we're making sure our clients know about it. And then just in general, when I talk to folks and that meet my daily life.
And if I'm understanding correctly, this clause was the one that came out in 2018?
Well, it was the clause that we put generally in all of our wills that does relate back to the Revised Uniform Fiduciary Access to Digital Assets Act that did pass in Alabama that went into effect in 2018. So it does relate back to that act. That's why it came about. So yes, you're right.
Okay, so 7 years ago, and I'm still, as a financial counselor, learning more and more about digital assets. So it's not something that is greatly known to the masses. A lot of folks, if you were to ask what a digital asset was, they might give you some good monetary digital assets like online banking and online investments. But when we really get into the weeds, there are a lot of folks that don't even know how to access how you would apply some digital link to a family member that could take over that in the future.
Right. And I think that's the challenge that we have as in the financial world and legal world. Where do you put that all together? Because I think it's been so easy to say for the lawyer, well, this is your legal advice, and for the financial person, this is your financial advice. But this is kind of a component of it all kind of comes together because everything has a password and it's our username potentially in its own right, in its own world. And how do we make sure that the client or the family member knows how to use it? And it's one of those things that there's not really a right or wrong answer potentially. There's different ways to get to the right answer. So that creates another hurdle of when you don't have a right answer, because there's many right ways to do something in this world. And I think that's for folks like us, we have to just always stay. I mean, I got ready for the financial symposium in March. We're now in July. There's been things that I found that have changed since in those little bit of time frame when I was getting ready to come talk to you today. And it's amazing how fast things can change just in a couple of months.
And if that's frustrating for you, and this is your profession, this is something that you're supposed to know, how frustrating is it for the consumer who may have thought they knew where to find this, and then yet again, it has changed? So what I will say, what is tried and true, and I know that you're going to provide some options in the future here, but we're kind of similar generation, our upbringing and where we are. And I have to say that when I have worked with widows or widowers, the thing that was most beneficial was something that was written and that was available to be held in hand by a family member post death. And usually that's in the form of like a digital password keeper or a digital password booklet where the family member has written down all the online accounts and any other accounts that may not be online, but here are all of the things that I want you to have access to. And here's the password today, but just know that password could have changed over several months. So that's where now we get into even further in the weeds. It's one thing to know where these are located, but then how digitally, if that password has changed, where do we go from there?
That's one of the exact issues is that, yes, people like to write things down, but when you write things down, like you said, passwords are going to change. Are you going to remember to update the password? That creates, and I said earlier, we might talk about some products, the password managers. That is a product that is available out there. An example is 1Password. I had a client recently in my office that they gave me permission to share this. They've used that product for over a decade now. They find it very beneficial because it creates passwords for them. It's the 16-digit password. I mean, I guess I can come up with a 16-digit password, but I don't know about you, but I use the same passwords over and over. So if you probably could figure out, there are probably 4 of them actually, I probably shouldn't say that, but if you probably could create, if you figure out what those 4 are, I mean, they're not that, pretty easy to figure out actually, probably. But, honestly, if you could figure something out about people and figure out their rhythm, then you might figure out their passwords. I mean, we're all told not to write down your passwords anywhere. I mean, we all have them stored probably somewhere fairly easy, but you have to think about that too. So that is another option to think about if you have a password manager. And there's different options out there. There's some very secure options. There are ones for family members that you have. I was looking at some today that honestly, minimally a month, when you think about it long term, you have to think I'm paying that a month. You probably pay that to go through and get a cup of coffee that when you go through a drive-through.
That's a very good point. And what would you say to the naysayers? Because you might have some folks like me listening in the audience like, oh, not another subscription, not another thing that might put me at risk digitally for someone if they do crack the code and get into my passwords. What would you say to the audience, the greater reward for going ahead and paying for that, for going ahead and planning this now? What kind of frustration would that save the person who is left behind?
Well, I think as the person that's left behind, if you don't know anything, or say everything is kind of paperless right now. Say you do know that you get the usernames and passwords, but say mom or dad didn't forgot to tell you, well, there's the bank password. They put bank account. Well, what if mom or dad didn't tell you what bank it goes to? So let's go to my phone and then looked in the apps where there's two banks in here. Well, so I've got two banking apps in here. So that's pretty easy. We probably can tell the username and password will be one of those two banks, but either one of those two banks aren't going to really help you. I mean, so you have to think about those things. No one's really going to help you when it gets down to it. So you're already in a state of grief. And then here we go on top of that. I mean, think how many times you've entered the right password and it's, you're like, I know I've entered the right password and it's not clicking in for some reason, and how frustrating that is. Or, you get 3 chances to enter a password, especially on the banking one sometimes, and then you're locked out, you're done. So then therefore, if you're locked out of an account, what happens? And then sometimes they'll talk to you, sometimes they won't, sometimes then maybe it requires a court order. So you have to be very careful on some of these things, what you're doing when you are accessing usernames and passwords, that you're not making sure you're not making any mistakes. So as the person that's left behind, you want to leave them clear instructions, but you also want to make sure that they have access to everything they need to do those, to follow your instructions of what you want them to do.
I think that's awesome. And it's not just to save them frustration, but it's also to get them your full estate as intended. When you were providing the training and the symposium, I too was hanging on every word. And I was thinking, wow, you talk about not only the monetary accounts, like when people think of digital assets, this is where their mind goes to online banking, investment accounts, credit cards, or digital payment accounts, like you mentioned PayPal and Venmo. But then you started getting into points accounts. Where do your airline miles go? That's cash. When you really think about it, that is an asset that could greatly and positively impact this person's life. Finally open the doors for travel or what have you, hotel points and other reward points that we'll get into in a minute. But having these in your digital portfolio as well, or your estate planning, I would say estate planning guide, or your digital password keeper, or the password manager that you're referring to. What say you on that topic?
When you think about those, we have so many folks that are obviously government employees or contractors and work for the Department of Defense, that you do have to go TDY a lot. And when you go TDY, you get those points. And I didn't realize, I talked to so many clients that, we use ours, they say, to take our vacation, or we gift them to our children so they can take a vacation. Those add up so fast that you want to be able to leave those. It's basically like you're leaving a free trip you want a free trip to Paris and you're walking away from it. Would you really walk away from a free trip to Paris? Would you want to not take that free trip? Or free trip to wherever you want to go around the world? But you have to think about that. How you don't want to leave a vacation because a lot of times it is a vacation when you think about it. You just have to pay for your food and what happens when you get there. But sometimes folks have that many points, and you want to make sure, again, you're leaving a trip behind that last family trip that your family could be taking for themselves, that you could leave them. You've left that behind that they could have. And I always call it the death book. I always say, have your death book. Sometimes mine's called, in case I get hit by a bus, here's what you need to know. So that's what I call mine. Sometimes I have other ones. I tell clients, name it whatever you want, but you have that with all the things and all the instructions, and then separately have the book where everything is, for your passwords and things of that nature. But so everybody knows where everything is, and your heirs and whoever's going to handle things for you know where they can find things.
And as I read through some of the terms and agreements that you provided in snapshots, American Airlines, Delta Airlines, it looks like United Airlines off the top will allow you to transfer from 500 to 100,000 miles, but then others will not allow you to transfer. So another what's in it for me to getting my loved ones to create this death book is so, hey, I can take over with your password, with your account, I can take over these miles because some of them are non-transferable. And so that's something to consider as well. I mean, a lot of folks would like to believe, oh, well, I'll just take care of that when that happens. Surely we can transfer those. And I have a funny story for you. I have someone in my life who recently talked about a person that he knows who is passing. And this person has had plenty of time due to the diagnosis to plan their estate. This person had a rewards account with a massage service. Well, you are only allowed to transfer so many of those hours of that service to someone else. So how do you go around that then if you can only use that? Now, obviously, we are not encouraging any criminal or illegal activity whatsoever. But if my husband passes and he has these reward points and he's built this up, I would like to use those reward points. I would like to use this, whether it is for those massage services. Now, maybe massage is going to be a little different because, female coming in rather than a male, different type of thing. But then again, where I was going with that, a lot of folks just have this belief that a business or a company will have compassion on you and just give you what you're asking for. But that's not how the world works.
No, and unfortunately, they will stand on their terms and agreements all day long, and they will just say, well, according to terms and agreement number, and spit it out whatever number it is. And they don't really get past that because they hear so many, unfortunately, stories. And if they did that, if they bend the rules, again, you've always heard this, if you bend the rules for one, you have to bend them for all. And so they go by, this is what the rules are. And that's why I always say, when you are looking at, say, for example, the airline miles, every carrier is different. Some of them will allow a straight transfer to any family member. One of them is just allow to the spouse. One of them you have to pay to transfer. So I always say, look at each one of them, their terms and agreement. Decide if you can fly the one, in my opinion, fly the one that allows you to transfer to anyone. That's the one I prefer to fly. Again, I'm not endorsing any one of them at all. And the same thing on the hotel points. Really look at the terms and agreements when you are making decisions. If that is something, if you're a points person, I'm a points person, except I like to earn my points at Chick-fil-A because my son and I eat at Chick-fil-A way too much. I think I've said that before to folks. So, but those kind of points too are important too. There's food points. We haven't gotten there yet, but some people are food points, and you don't want to walk away from that chicken sandwich either. So,
and I think that's the best thing to do for the integrity and the character, right? So that you don't feel like you're engaging in any kind of illegal activity. If there were a company that said, hey, yeah, these are non-transferable upon death, I mean, there's discomfort in pulling the wool over someone's eyes. And again, that's not what we're encouraging whatsoever. But what we are encouraging is at the outset, when you are signing up for any kind of rewards program, to look and actually read the terms of agreement. Yay! The points are transferable, whether it's with your airline, your hotel. Look at those things now. Look at them today. So perhaps you go ahead and exhaust the points of the one that is non-transferable, and then you create a new rewards program with a company where they are transferable. And who knows, if this podcast reaches the right kind of ears on the business side, whoa, there's influence there. Maybe we need to update our terms of agreement just to satisfy consumers.
Well, that's funny that you say that, because there is a current documentary on Netflix right now about a cruise that happened way back several years ago, and what happened on this cruise. And it was a horrible experience for everyone on the boat. And unfortunately, at the time, Carnival Cruises did not guarantee that you would have, you would have running water. You would be able to use the bathroom. And because of the sewage issue on the boat, they did not. Carnival stood by the terms and agreements. I'm sorry, nobody could sue. The terms and agreements said that you didn't get to have that. Now, let me say, Carnival did go back and offer people, I think they did make some offers as far as what they got. Not that anybody probably would want to get on a Carnival boat again after those 3 days. But the maritime lawyers that were all ready to just jump on that and sue them, they could not, because of what everyone signed when you signed on the dotted line. And no one looked at that clause, but who would have really thought, too, that when you got on a boat, that there was going to be a fire on a boat and that you would be stuck at sea for that many days. But that is something now that has been updated. So the pressure from the industry, and after what happened, the news pressure of those folks being stuck on that boat for those 3 days. But that's just one example of the pressures that you can create from the terms and agreements, I know, from something like that.
And not only do we want to pressure businesses so that they actually have terms and agreements that are satisfying to all involved, we also want to pressure family members to get off their duff already and do something about their estate planning. I've had several clients come in as we are talking about in financial planning in and of itself. And as we go through the different steps, okay, so we've gotten through these topics. Now let's talk about estate planning. Oh, I don't want to do that. I don't have the money for that. And as I'm looking at their spend plan and I see a surplus, yes, you do. And here's the what's in it for you if you do this. And so that's all we're trying to get across today. And so we're getting close to our 20-minute segment. We don't want to lose folks. We have a lot more to say on this topic. So, Emily, I want to leave this episode with you. What would you say to those folks as we are putting that pressure on to the family members to really start thinking, not just thinking about it anymore, but actually taking action?
You have to think about, if something were to happen, what is the plan? We plan everything in our lives down to the minute, sometimes every day of our lives. So what is so different about, why are you not planning for what's going to happen when you're gone? Or what if something were to happen to you? Say you were to have a stroke, a heart attack. What's going to happen to your spouse? What's going to happen? You're in the hospital for days, months. What's going to happen to your children? Those kind of things can happen too. That's why the estate planning documents are so critical, because of the powers of attorneys, the advanced medical directives. It's not just necessarily about your will, what happens after you die. It's about what happens if something happens to you while you're still here and you can't make decisions for yourself too.
Perfect. And just to kind of help allay some of the fears that some folks may have, if we go back to the digital monetary assets, some of that is already taken care of and folks don't need to do anything else. If it's an online banking account, there usually is a payable upon death that the account holder had to sign. But how long ago was that? So it's not just about docs in order or documents in order. It's also about having those conversations with your spouse or your loved ones. When was the last time you updated that payable on death? And like you said before, what is the name of the bank? And all those things. So yes, there are digital assets that are already taken care of, whether it's through that payable on death or designation of beneficiary or transferable on death, like such as with investments. But again, having those hard conversations, and then if those are not tied to something already, making sure that you're just speaking to an attorney of what the next steps might be. Next episode coming up, we're going to continue to dive into other digital assets that you may not have ever considered a digital asset. And if you found this podcast helpful, please remember to rate us wherever you listen to the podcast.